Who gets profits from the AI profits is a huge debate right now in South Korea at the Samsung factory. But this isn't the groups fighting that you would think it is. These workers were initially fighting over disproportionate wealth between workers and not between themselves and the shareholders, corporate board, C-suite, etc. And it also shows an important lesson about the social contract between employers and employees that I was just talking to two clients yesterday in my group coaching in school. So if you don't know me, I'm Dr. Anna Kalschmidt. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist who specializes on social class and the unwritten rules of work that impact career mobility. So here's the story. Samsung has two types of chips they've been producing. Memory chips, which are very profitable right now due to AI demand, and logic foundry chips. I'm learning all of this with you on the news. I'm not an IT connoisseur. Logic foundry chips apparently make a lot of chips for NVIDIA and Tesla, but they have been losing money, like billions, apparently lately. So Samsung wanted to give the memory workers bonuses of around 600% of their salary, which, to be honest, especially as an American, that's very impressive. Because I know America has a disproportionate amount of wealth in the world, but it doesn't usually get distributed back to workers like that. So already I'm like, interesting. However, the logic foundry workers were only going to get a bonus of about 100%. Now, I know for most of you watching this, a bonus of 100% of your salary sounds phenomenal. 50 to 100%. But if your coworkers were getting a 600% reward, you'd be a little pissed. Let's be honest, I would. So the union got involved. The union was like, whoa, this will drive some of the best foundry logic engineers to your competitors. This isn't a good idea. Not fair. And Samsung is apparently one of the few organizations that has full service for chips, both of these chips. And they're like, you're going to lose this competitor edge. This escalated to the point of 45,000 employees going on an 18-day strike, the largest in Samsung's history. And JP Morgan estimates that this strike will cost Samsung about 14 to 21 billion with a B dollars in operating profit. Engineers were already starting to leave, and one of them interviewed by Reuters said that he was already applying to competitors while he was on the picket lines with 40,000 other people. But let's be clear, I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, right? So I look at the impact on business and people. It is both. And that's something that I think this case shows really explicitly, is that the workers are impacted and the supply chain and the business. They reached a tentative deal yesterday, this past Wednesday, to get a bonus deal of 12% of operating profit, combining an existing program with a program for bonus, like performance bonus. Strike got called off, pending that union members approve of what they received. And in the same day, the shareholders threatened to sue because they said that the deal that was reached on 12% of pre-tax profits being distributed wasn't legal, and that pre-tax is supposed to go to dividends for shareholders and future investments. And then they also threatened to pursue damages towards union leaders and striking workers. And a lot of the global media coverage that I've seen, which again, algorithms, do their thing and are very individualistic nowadays, a lot of this has been on the supply chain issues that have resulted from this and not a labor rights perspective, of course. The social contract, which has been violated, especially in the last few years, is that you work at a place, you give your labor, and they give you a consistent salary. They take on the risk of running a business, the debts, the economic downturns, the etc. And in exchange, you have relative security and benefits that make it worth your time and labor without the additional stress and work of running a business. And they get a cut of the profits after they pay you fairly. That has been changing for a while. You only break the social contract so far before it backfires. And this gets pushed pretty far in individualistic societies because people look out for themselves. And notice this isn't a clear-cut villain in this situation because this is workers fighting against other workers on who gets more bonuses versus others. This wasn't an original fight against the shareholders or CEOs or leaders. That's what's really interesting. And once an agreement was met, then they got involved. So it's not as clear-cut and as predicted on who it attacks first, but this is very common in that people usually attack each other before they attack higher in the hierarchy because that seems more attainable. Interestingly, the higher people are in class, the more individualistic they are. Not that, poor people or working class people can't get vicious or to make tough decisions to feed their families. I mean, there's an example, the example I give in my book, The Unwritten Rules of Work, is there's a study showing, individualism is rarer in the working class unless you're talking to people who are like homeless single mothers and then they have to take care of themselves and a child. A lot of work cultures, white-collar work cultures, promote individualism and this kind of sabotage between employees. It backfires in many ways that aren't even about we should get a share of profits or bonuses. It shows up in ways of like work not getting done, and because people are afraid that a good job getting done by one person that is not them won't be seen as a team win and that they will lose their jobs. It is more common among the upper middle class, upper class to be individualistic. And my research has found that this individualism is one of the invisible class barriers that people trying to experience social mobility run across. This quote from my book. Decades of research find that people who are socially advantaged tend to value individualism, while socially disadvantaged groups tend to value community. Our social classes influence our psychological patterns. People who have resources, the higher classes, value individualism because they have more power and control. They are able to focus on themselves, their goals, and their motivations. The upper classes perceive fewer environmental threats because they have access to resources to mitigate risk and threats. There's then a couple paragraphs, and I go on to say, however, people with fewer resources must be aware of external threats and constraints. They do not have the resources to pull them out of a bad investment or a risky situation. For someone who is so poor they have nothing to lose, they might still engage in risky behavior, but they still might be hypervigilant in noticing the environment and how it will impact them. People who grow up in the working class cultures have limited resources. Consequently, these communities value sharing these limited resources, adjusting to each other's needs, and working together as a community. People who adhere to interdependent values tend to be conscious of how other people feel and adjust their behavior to attempt to make them more comfortable. Working class people cannot afford a nanny to take care of their children, but they can rely on their neighbor to babysit. In return, they will do the same. I go on, give some more examples, and then I end with, when we know this, it makes sense why throughout American history, we have seen elite business leaders complain that nobody wants to work anymore, while the working class wonder where their job benefits went. To the working class, the job context changed. To the upper class, the people did. I'm seeing the news for this the day after we had our weekly group coaching call in school yesterday, which is my community where I do group coaching once a week. It's a more affordable option for people who can't afford one-on-one coaching and a great supplement for people who can. I have a lot of clients that do both. And yesterday I had one client who had just left an abusive job and was at another and was, trying to make sure she doesn't end up in the same situation again. She very heavily vetted her new employer. She's setting boundaries, etc. We're working on that together. And there was another person who's very new. This was his first session, and he had repeat issues in the workplace. And he was talking about, I want to work on what is within my control to not end up in the same situation. And something that I talked to both of them about was you have to see work as transactional. That is something that has been missed because people don't want to see their work as transactional. I think they want to know that I'm going to go somewhere and be treated well. And unfortunately, that's just not where we're at right now. And people who go in ready to give their all, ready to invest early, because you're always told, you don't get the promotion until you've already done the job, get exploited. And that was exactly what had happened to my coachee, who I've worked with for several months now, who left her job because for 4 years she was abused and exploited and promised a promotion that when it happened didn't even come with a raise. And this points to an unwritten rule from my research. So one of the unwritten rules is the shift to individualism. This is when, as you move up higher in your organization, you're expected to do more self-promotion, be more individualistic, only look out for yourself. There are also rules of hierarchy, written and unwritten. And in my book, I talk about how stack ranking is one of them, which has been making its way back around Silicon Valley, even though every time this has become mainstream, it's been a disaster. Because what it does is it encourages workers to pit against each other. Stack ranking is when no matter what, the bottom 5 to 10% of the team has to go, even if they're decent performers. And I wrote in the book on the chapter on the unwritten rule of informal hierarchy and talking about stack ranking and how this impacted Microsoft. The stack ranking system at Microsoft made an informal hierarchy on the team very obvious, knowing that every performance review season, it would become a tangible hierarchy with very clear consequences. If someone on the team has to be metaphorically fed to the sharks, every person on the team now has a priority to push someone off the boat so it isn't them. And then I said in parentheses, have I mentioned toxic individualism is an unwritten rule of work? And that was chapter 1. I also talk about in chapter 8 on the unwritten rule of boundaries, how this was a factor at Wells Fargo as well. In fact, Congress called out the CEO of Wells Fargo, John Stumpf, for the fraud scandal in 2016, blaming really low wages with insane profits among the executives. And John Stumpf was called out for this. Former Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey and the one-up scandal outlined the cultural issues involved in this case. This isn't the work of 5,300 bad apples. This is the work of sowing seeds that rotted the entire orchard. He said, you and your senior executives created an environment in which this culture of deception and deceit thrived. This is a combination of low wages, punishing sales quotas, and a grossly misaligned compensation incentive, he continued. Menendez reminded Stump that he had previously testified that Wells Fargo bankers earned good money, quoted to be between $30,000 and $60,000 a year. Menendez then asked Stump what he had made the year before. A cool $19.5 million. Now that's good money, Menendez replied, and then asked Stump to put himself in the position of someone who had to live off of $30,000 a year, who knew if they did not meet sales targets that they could lose their job. According to The Guardian, Stump meekly replied that the vast majority of employees loved Wells Fargo. So you see, we see these patterns emerge, and it's a really interesting combination of when individualism is wanted at work versus when it becomes a problem at work, and the class dynamics of when are workers fighting each other versus when are they fighting the shareholders, the company, the leadership.